Kalen DeBoer talks about revenue sharing, suggests Alabama is in trouble when it comes to NIL. You were beating the drum early on this. I was like, man, what's Caleb talking about? Surely to goodness, they'll throw some cash for Kalen DeBoer and make sure that he is able to compete, because you don't have the Saban discount, the Saban advantage any longer. But he suggests that Alabama is in trouble with NIL.
Well, he's implying it, and I don't think he meant to imply it. So he was speaking with On Three's Pete Nikos, and he said that the advent of revenue sharing with players will help the Crimson Tide because it will create a more even playing field and bring college football to, quote, real recruiting. Now, this is in response to, as we know, the House settlement. They're allowing schools to distribute up to $21 million to players, but third-party boosters can still make NIL payments to supplement the roster building. And it sounds like DeBoer is calling for revenue sharing even on that. And
now, for those that don't know, what would revenue sharing be?
That's the thing. It's like, I don't know how I don't even know. How do you revenue share direct NIL payments from boosters?
No,
it's not possible.
No, who's sharing the revenue?
Basically, like, okay, the concept of revenue sharing is whether you're Alabama or Vanderbilt, whatever the schools bring in, it's all gone into a pot, and they're all given the money evenly to distribute it. That's revenue sharing.
That's what I was asking. Is it player to player or school to school? Well, that's stupid.
Well, I don't mind it with the money the school directly pays the players. NFL does revenue sharing, and it works out perfectly. So I don't mind that. I think the NFL took over the national landscape because they got into revenue sharing early. Now, the issue is with NIL, which is, again, I don't know how you revenue share. Like, Dave, if a player goes to Tennessee and Ted Russell Ford gives them a call and says, hey, you want to do a commercial for me? Here's $500,000. How is the NCAA or the House supposed to step in and say, well, that money's got to be taken from you now and be split to other players at other schools? That's not possible, right? There's no possible way to regulate that. But here's what Kalen DeBoer is calling for. His quote on it was, he says, quote, the regulation is really important to the game itself. That regulation where we're all on an even playing field from the revenue sharing standpoint helps us, just because now it comes down to what is important in recruiting, and that's relationships and sharing your vision. People that want to be aligned with your vision and then come to a place like Alabama that has the resources, the tradition, the regulation, and having a more balanced playing field helps our situation. It allows us to get where it was at one point just a few years back, where recruiting is real recruiting, not someone who's going to put in the highest bid, unquote. And the only reason Kalen DeBoer would say something like that is if Alabama's boosters aren't ponying up the money he needs them to pony up.
Yeah, it's kind of funny we throw in this NIL and paying players and all this thing. And you mentioned this earlier in the week, and it caught my ear. At the end of the day, aren't we still talking about talent evaluation? Because it was talent evaluation whether or not to offer a guy and pay him under the table. And now it's whether or not to give him $100,000 or $200,000 or $50,000. It's still ultimately about talent evaluation.
It's Moneyball. Talent evaluation is, this guy should be worth $300,000 on the open NIL market, and we can get him for $50,000. The same way the Oakland A's and Moneyball back in the day, what would they do? They weren't just looking for the best players based on sabermetrics. They were looking for the best players that they could get on a deal because no one knew they were good. Like, they were basically saying, according to our analytics, this guy should be worth $900,000. We can get him for $300,000. Or this guy should be worth $9 million. We can get him for $2 million. Now, that's talent evaluation. Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, I mean, if you're at Alabama, why did Kalen DeBoer take the Alabama job, Dave? You move your family from Washington to Alabama because you don't want to have to do talent evaluation, right? You want to be able to recruit.
Yep.
So
agree.
How much, I'll ask you, does Alabama boosters just not have a lot of money, or are they just stupid? And do they think that people are just unwilling to pony up the money?
I think they're not used to it yet. And I think it'll take the next coach. That's why I think DeBoer's in trouble.
So how many coaches are they going to have to run through, though? I mean, we're talking about a program that ran through how many coaches in the past? And by the way, this isn't new. Let's be fair. You know this. Before NIL, boosters still had to pony up money and be forward-thinking, right? And not rest on laurels. And I mean, wasn't part of Tennessee's decade of dysfunction boosters saying, well, don't you know we're Tennessee and players are lucky to come to this school? Wouldn't they think that a lot of times?
Oh, well, I think there was all kinds of messes going on. I would really have trouble highlighting one, wouldn't you? I
I
mean,
would too.
bad
Bas-
coaches, players with attitude problems. I mean, it was a mess.
Basically, so what you're saying though is the boosters still think it's a privilege to go to Alabama, right? And you should be grateful that you're there.
Yeah, I guess, Caleb. If that's their attitude, then Tennessee's in good shape. For I mean, it's I think that Tennessee has to continue to spend, and if they don't, then they're going to fall behind. And I think that's with every school. If any school thinks that they can just sit back and not spend to either keep their players or go out and get more, they're in trouble. And that budget needs to grow each and every year by 10% or not or so.
So do you agree with me that Alabama's calling that DeBoer's calling for this because Alabama's boosters aren't ponying up?
Yeah, I don't think they're used to ponying up. And here's the other thing. At the end of the day, Caleb, it's kind of like two businesses. There's the NIL function, and then there's still the Alabama Booster Club that has to raise money to keep up facilities. Now, those guys probably get paid. Think about this for a second. On commission on donations, right? Or they have some sort of escalating salary or something, a bonus system. Well, they're not going to want to give that up and say, oh, go spend that money with the NIL guys. They're going to be competitive in a sales position and try to keep all the money they can, even if it might not be the best thing for their university.
So what you're saying is for the boosters now, it's now becoming the NIL. I mean, a lot. So what you're saying is boosters for the longest time, their boosting of a program were partially business moves too.
Yeah.
And
well, and
it's hard
I've
to
talked to Jimmy Himes about this. So Jimmy's a little bit older than me. He has older friends. You know, that talent tax or whatever they called it, the talent fee, that didn't sit well with a bunch of older fans because then you're mandated to participate in NIL because you're donating to the university and that's part of your donation. Well, that's not what there are a lot of in the older generation that think you're getting a University of Tennessee scholarship, that should be enough. And they don't want to be a part of that. I think you're fighting that battle as well.
I could see that. I mean, I could see you absolutely fighting that battle. And that battle probably seems a lot harder to fight at Alabama, but I want to push back on something DeBoer said where he said it goes back to real recruiting. Why shouldn't negotiations for NIL be a part of real recruiting? Why shouldn't a player be allowed to do that? I mean, I guess what they're saying is the money you can offer just outweighs every other thing that goes into recruiting, but like, so what? That's still something that's valuable that you offer, isn't it? You still weigh that against your NFL prospects, your success, the school experience you want to have. I mean, those are all still factors, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of the factors. If a young man, that's why was it the Hopkins kid who went to Minnesota out of left field?
Oh, the Hopkins kid out of Nashville.
See, that I thought that was strange because did they just pony up to get one guy to Nashville in hopes that that could lead to a pipeline there? Was that the theory?
Justin Hopkins is his name.
Yes.
Yes. No, I think I told you my theory on that because he actually wasn't that highly recruited. PJ Fleck is the Butch Jones of the Big Ten. And PJ Fleck wanted the narrative that he got a kid out of SEC country. That's all that was about. Was he's going to all of his boosters and all the media members at Minnesota right now. I'm saying, look at our recruiting guys. We got a kid out of SEC country. That's all that was about. He just wanted to be able to sell that to people. Again, it was a very Butch Jones move.
Well,
honestly.
And you got to remember, Nashville is the biggest city north in the SEC. I guess you could argue Lexington, but
no, Nashville's way bigger than Lexington, significantly
right.
so.
I'm aware. But Nashville is way bigger now. And in terms of college football talent, in terms of college football talent, there's no comparison between Lexington, I don't care how big the city, it's roughly the size of Knoxville, right? I don't care how big it is. They don't produce any talent.
No. And think about it. This is Nashville Central Time Zone. Minnesota's on the Mississippi River. You just go straight down the Mississippi River and 3 hours east on I-40, get a kid out of Nashville. You go back up to Minnesota and you tell a couple of media. I mean, again, this was a steal headlines move. This was a New York Jets signing Tim Tebow. I want to get some front page headlines in the Minneapolis St. Paul Tribune, whatever the newspapers are up there, and tell people I got a kid out of Nashville. It was a very insecure move by PJ Fleck. He spent all of his time recruiting that, and at the sacrifice and to the detriment of getting a roster building, honestly. So that's what that was about. That's also a very old school way of thinking recruiting wise, because we're talking the NIL age. But I will say that, like, the only thing I'll say with Kalen DeBoer that's kind of interesting about him saying this is that, I mean, you know, we're underrating Alabama's still recruiting well. They had the 3rd ranked recruiting class this past year. Now they don't really, so I wonder if this has to do with this year right now. They have the 34th ranked class, only 3 commits, but it's early. So I don't think anybody. Do you think there's some interior panic going on with Kalen DeBoer's recruiting right now?
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't think it's Kalen DeBoer's fault. I don't think he has the NIL support behind him.
No, he doesn't. And I mean, I don't understand. I mean, I've told you guys this, like, what we talk about with Notre Dame and the way they think college football starts and ends with them. That's actually how Tuscaloosa is. People in Alabama think the college football world starts and ends with them. And you are lucky if you grace the presence of Tuscaloosa in the statue of Bear Bryant.